Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Mitch Beinhaker. Mitch, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it.
Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I am a small business attorney in the United States, in New Jersey. I mostly practice in New Jersey. I do some federal tax planning for people that are looking to shelter taxes, save money in taxes, things like that. But for the most part, it's in New Jersey. I am a transactional and drafting attorney, I call myself. So I draft and write agreements for people to start, grow, run, sell, merge their businesses. Client agreements, partnership agreements, employment agreements, anything in those realms, and as well as transactional work. So somebody's purchasing a new location or leasing space or onboarding a new, merging their practice, selling their business, transferring it to the next generation, all that kind of transactional stuff I do as well. I don't go to court. So if I can't avoid court for people, I do negotiate things. If things don't come together too well, then I bring in a colleague to handle it. And I run a pretty much virtual practice. I work out of a co-working space now. I used to have a larger firm, but I don't anymore. And I've kind of simplified my life. And I try to be as virtual as I can. Now with Zoom and everything like that, it's a little bit easier, but there are some times where people have to actually sign documents in front of me. So I have to get together with them and so forth.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. I mentioned beforehand about the fact that I haven't spoken to anyone in the legal profession on my podcast. And I think that law and accounting are the two areas where business owners or perhaps entrepreneurs know the least that is applicable to business owners or business activity. What do you think about that concept?
Yeah, I think that as entrepreneurs, and I'm, an entrepreneur at heart, and I love building businesses and helping people build business. I think we're very right brain when it comes to that stuff. We like the creative side of it, and we kind of shy away from, the numbers and the legal stuff and putting things in writing, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so we shy away from that stuff, but that's what gets us in trouble. Not having a written signed agreement, not knowing our numbers and finances in terms of what our profitability is and, where our pain points are from a risk standpoint as markets change. And so we don't really know that stuff. And I find business owners all the time that are struggling or going out of business because they didn't pay attention to that stuff. And some of it you can outsource, but you can outsource your bookkeeping, for example, but you can't outsource your understanding of the finances of your business. What your cost of goods sold are, what your actual operating costs are. And you certainly can't farm out the way you run your business and stuff. I'm not suggesting you should write your own agreements, but you have to do things in writing. A lot of people don't do that. And I think that's a lot of it, is that we're more interested in the marketing stuff and, building a cool website, putting together our product and getting all that cool stuff. And it's fun. I enjoy it too, but you got to put time aside to create habits, I would say, that protects you as you're moving forward with all this stuff. I mean, even from the marketing standpoint, right? You don't put up a website and then have no, privacy disclaimers and terms and conditions on your website. Now, people do it, I'm sure, right? You've seen it, but it's not good practice. So I think that's something that as business owners, if we want to be successful or improve our chances of success, we got to have to kind of suck it up and pay attention to, accounting and legal stuff.
So based on my own question, I do have a follow-up, which is, what are you like with the accounting side of things?
What do I do?
Well, how's your knowledge based on the fact that you got the legal stuff sorted? Are you kind of au fait with the accounting stuff, or is it?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I've gotten to the point where because I have a simplified practice, I don't really need a bookkeeper anymore. So I have, one day a month on my calendar that's set aside on a Monday, and I do all of the bookkeeping and stuff like that. So it's pretty simple. But yeah, I mean, over the years, I've also had to learn how to, properly account for things because I want to take the maximum advantage of the tax law. That's one of the advantages of being in business. We have all these stresses and difficulties of success, but you want to certainly maximize your income and minimize your taxes. Taxes are voluntary. You're allowed to do planning. So I've learned over the years from other colleagues of mine who are CPAs what you can and cannot deduct, how to keep track of things and follow your systems. I have a system of how money comes in, puts aside for taxes, puts aside for other things, goes in the operating account, pay for this, pay for that. I've made it a part of my business. I use a bit of a modified version of Profit First, if you've heard of it. Yeah. Mike Michalowicz has been on my podcast, and he's a great guy. So I use a modified version of his system. But yeah, you got to find something that works for you and learn enough that you can be, a little dangerous about it.
What would you say that you see regularly, like as a repeat incident where it's something that should be avoided in the legal profession, but business owners or businesses, they typically do it over and over again as a mistake?
Yeah, well, the number one, like, let's call it a trend or a theme, is that business owners tend not to put things in writing. They're so busy, running around, shaking hands, doing this, agreeing to this, or will you do this? Okay, well, and they don't sit down and say, okay, I need a client agreement. I need to have an agreement with my partner. I should have a written business plan, not just in my head and sticky notes all over my office, but I should have it at least put together so it's a working, document that I can use on a regular basis. And that leads to conflicts. It leads to terrible misunderstandings because our memory, right, is very imperfect for most people. Our memories are like one big box, and everything gets thrown in the box, and there's sticky notes sticking to the wrong things, and we get confused about stuff. It's not that people are going to, let's assume that people aren't going to take advantage of you. That's not their intention, right? When you're dealing with customers and you're dealing with vendors and you're dealing with partners, we just remember things differently. That's just the way things work. Now, ironically, the law treats us as if we have perfect memories, right? Witness testimony, depositions, agreements as to what you said, he said, she said. So you got to have it in writing. And that's like the biggest mistake that I see businesses continue to make, is that they don't, for example, they don't deal with customers. And look, there are retail operations, whatever, you can't have a signed contract. But for the most part, if you have an ongoing relationship with clients or customers, you should have a written agreement. And some people aren't so comfortable with that. So they say, I don't know, how do I whip out an agreement in front of somebody like it's all formal and it makes them uncomfortable. I said, well, if you do it that way, they're going to be uncomfortable and so are you. So you got to figure a way to make it part of the way you do business, because then when the person says, I don't think that's what we agreed to, you can go, well, I don't remember it either. Let me pull out the agreement. And you pull out the agreement and it says exactly what you agreed to, when they can cancel, when they can't cancel, what they get charged for, all those types of things. Because I find that even relationships, if you don't have it in writing, they're just all over the place. It starts here and it starts going off track because you're dealing, your course of dealing. So that's the biggest mistake that business owners make. Learn to put things in writing.
I've seen a trend, at least over the internet anyway, where the concept of a contract is essentially agreeing to terms and conditions. So, right, tick here and you agree to all these terms and conditions. Is that a workaround, or is that perhaps a misconception?
I would say it's a workaround in certain situations. You don't have much of a choice if you're doing e-commerce, and people are buying things through your website or signing up through your website. I would just make sure that it's clear, that you have things in capitals that are important to read, that you don't make it too long and convoluted, because people just, they go through Quick License and they just agree and they say, well, I didn't know, I just had to do that. Well, maybe you should say at the top, these are our terms and conditions and you're going to be held responsible for those. Please read them. If you'd like a copy, we can send you a copy. I think a lot of people overlook that stuff. But if you have, regular dealings with customers and they're not really through your website, what's wrong with having a retainer agreement generated and sent to them and have them sign it? You can do that electronically. It is an extra step. It's got to add some additional features to your website. But on my website, I do have some document preparation where people can add a discount, because it's simplified wills, simplified agreements for people that are just getting started in business. I do have a Quick License where it says that, you're agreeing to these terms and make sure you read them, because this is going to be your retainer agreement. And I don't send it to them. They can request it because I'm required to, by law. But it's not necessarily a workaround. It just depends on the situation and what they're doing, what they're agreeing to. But I would make sure some of these terms and conditions, you've seen them, they're just reams of digital paper. You can just scroll through to the bottom, and then they make the accept button not work until you scroll through the bottom. So people just scroll through real quickly and don't read anything. So I don't know workaround, but I think in court of law it's going to hold up. I think people are not stupid. They're clicking. It says you accept the terms. So the fact that you didn't read them is more your problem, especially B2B. The courts are going to hold business owners more to the terms of their agreements, and you got to read what you sign. This B2C, maybe the judges are going to give them a little bit of leeway, but it's not like it's so uncommon click licensing anymore.
Do you read those long terms and conditions where you have?
I mean, I might peruse them a little bit, but a lot of them are very standard. If you read, one set, because what happens is they don't get a lawyer, so they get their terms and conditions from being passed around the internet. And you see a lot. I once got an agreement, forget who it came from, that somebody said, send it to me to review. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is my agreement. Like, where the hell? So, I must have done a deal with a colleague, and he used some of the language or used all the language, or whatever. I don't copyright our stuff. We share all over the place. And somehow it worked its way to this client. And he thinks, he's like, can you just take a look at this? I'm like, yeah, it's my agreement. And he's like, really? And yeah, so that happens.
What's that phrase? It's the ultimate compliment.
Right, exactly. And if you use one or two agreements, it's not plagiarism, it's research. So use more than one. So, but I don't care that much about that. I don't mind. Colleagues are always sharing stuff. So
in terms of business size, it's my perception that at least when you're smaller, the chances of having to get involved in legal, let's say multiple legal transactions are probably, it's not going to be that frequent. But as you reach a particular size for your business, it's going to be more of a necessity. So what sort of size business do you think where you really start having to pay attention to, where it becomes more mandatory than bad habit, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, this probably doesn't really tie to size. I think it's a good habit to develop at the beginning, but everything's a cost, right? So if you're starting up your business, you're just getting started, you may not have the money to go out and spend a few $1,000s on an attorney to get a basic agreement. My minimum fee is $1,500. I don't really touch anything for less than that, because as you start working, it becomes time. That's just what happens. People are like, how come it's so much money? You find out it's a couple hours go real fast. So I find that it's kind of thing where people put off because of cost. And it's not necessarily the size, because what happens is, Tom, is that you get started in business, right? You start dealing with customers, and those relationships start growing, right? So at what point do you go back to your original customers and say, hey, we now do things formally. Can you sign this agreement just to formalize what we do? So it probably has nothing to do with, unless you're just getting started and you're like, listen, we're testing this out. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 6 months. So these are just test clients. But I would say it's probably less. Does it become more important as you grow? Sure, because you have assets. I would make sure from the get-go, if you're not doing things in writing, that you at least have insurance, right? If you get sued or whatever. But the problem is this, right? Even in simple situations, if you don't have it in writing and you have a misunderstanding, let's call them misunderstandings, right? You have a misunderstanding. They think that they agreed to this. You think that they agreed to something else, and you have this problem. It's not necessarily that that it's going to go to court, right? If it's a small misunderstanding, it's not worth it for them to sue you, but they may go and post something online. So if they're going to be less likely to do that, if you have an agreement in front of you that said, these are the terms of what we decided, and then they're putting some BS on the internet that's not accurate. Your agreement could also say that there's a non-disparagement clause, meaning if things don't work out with it, you're not allowed to go and say bad things about me. Then you have some teeth to what you're going to do. So I don't know if it's necessarily the size of your business. I think you want to address it as early on as possible. You could do it it doesn't have to be a 40-page agreement, But as transactions get larger, you find that contracts get bigger because they have more things they're concerned about. But that would be my piece of advice to people. Like, you want to start as early as possible, because it's very hard to change the way you're doing business with somebody midstream, and you don't know which relationships are going to blow up. I've had clients deal with things that are posted online from the littlest, relationships with people, and they don't have anything in writing, and the person says, well, this person just steals your money and doesn't do this and that. And you just kind of stuck with, kind of forcing those reviews down the list as you get better reviews on top of them, because you didn't do that. So I don't know if it's a size issue. I think it's more of a, you don't know what you need to protect, and I would do it as soon as you can. You could just do it simpler. It gets more complicated as you grow in size. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense, yeah. To what degree is a lot of the, let's say, legal relationship between one business and another hostile and just normal business function? How much would you say that is an aspect to it?
You mean in terms of how businesses interact and so forth?
Through your services, yeah. So how much
in my experience?
Yeah.
I think that for the most part, if you're doing things the way I encourage people to do it, that it's more just ongoing business. The problem is that, like you said, when people come to me, and they probably come to me more often than not nowadays after the fact, because it's not in writing, or because they didn't formalize it, it is more confrontational. Because it's broken down at this point. We went to the lawyer because we can't agree on our own as to what we want to do to solve the situation. If they're business owners that I'm working with from the beginning, or before they have a conflict and we're putting things in writing, I'm usually pretty good at teaching the business owner how to approach your customer, approach your client, and do it on an amicable basis. Hey, we're just trying to dot our I's and cross our T's here. This is what our understanding is of our relationship. We've been doing this, and this for 4 years for you. We're just trying to get everything in writing with everybody. And that becomes less confrontational. It's the people that come and say, I'm having problems and I need to shut down my business, so I got to negotiate with my landlord. Those tend to not be too good. But sometimes when there's attorneys involved, it's a lot less confrontational. At least let's forget about court, right? If my client is dealing with the other guy's client directly, they're probably butting heads and not, but they're pissed about it. But the attorneys usually have more of a level head. That's not always true. Every once in a while I run into a crazy lawyer who's, I'm like, is this personal for you? It's not your business. But, professionals usually have a leveler head when it comes to this stuff. So I would say it's probably 60-40, in terms of the 60 being more confrontational and the 40 being less. Sometimes it's 70-30, but I've had some crazy situations. Like, you're like, how did it come to this? But usually when it comes to me, it's something's gone awry way down the road,
Can you elaborate, or is that NDA stuff?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard. I mean, I've had business owners, I can't give you specifics, but they opened a business and we negotiate a lot of stuff, and between a landlord and a franchisor and a this and a that, and then the business didn't make it. And then, it comes down to negotiating them out of the obligations that they've created through the business. And as a lawyer and as a separated party, I can kind of hide behind the fact of, boo-hoo, my client's having this problem, it's not working. And I just keep going and going and going, and stringing along the other party from a negotiating standpoint to the point where they just finally give up. They finally break. All right, fine, we'll do this. And I get it, and I get it settled, and I get them out as unscathed as possible. So that's definitely a technique, I guess, of negotiation. You want to kind of wear the other party down, before, but that, that's what happens. So I'm trying to think of some others. I'll give you some examples that are more generic. So I've had a lot of small businesses, especially due to COVID, right, where they come to me and they said, listen, I was talking to my partner, or the two partners come to me and they said, listen, we're done. I want to go and be with my family, and I don't want to run the business anymore. It's been too hard. COVID's killed us. And they don't have an agreement, or they have a very poorly drafted agreement, and they are arguing about everything, right? If they're a florist, they're arguing about the website, the social media account, the pictures that went on the site, all the stuff. And it becomes very costly because, they got a lawyer and I'm the other party's lawyer. And then maybe and sometimes they're younger people in their 20s and 30s. So there's parents involved because the parents funded the business and the dad's like, let's say there's a guy and a girl. I could think of a couple of examples, but I see it more common with dads and daughters. So the dad is like, don't screw with my daughter. I don't care how much it costs me. He doesn't really feel that way, but he's just kind of posturing. And it leads to a lot of heartache, confrontation, that the people are trying to restart new businesses and move on with their life, but it's so intrusive and they just can't separate. So I find that a lot of that where business owners don't have the kind of things in writing, like, well, what happens if we want to split up? What happens if one of us getting sued? What happens if one of us dies? I did have a situation where someone died. They had an agreement with their partner. If I die, you buy out my share and then pay my wife, right? And it was all in writing. And there was a formula for the value. So we got into an argument about the value of the business. And he says, well, I don't care what the value is. I can't afford to do this. And if you don't, I'm not going to do it. And you have to sue me. And then the wife had to basically make a decision. Well, do I fight this person and spend maybe a lot of money in legal fees? And at the end of the day, may end up close to the offer that he's giving me now because I wasted it on time and aggravation. And in the meantime, she just needed to move on with her life. So we negotiate a little bit, but she settled. And that's the reality of it. And that was with an agreement, right? You can imagine people die and the family's like, well, I want you to buy me out. He's like, I'm not buying you out. What do you mean? I don't have your husband now and I got to run this business. And, and it's a lot of, it gets to be crazy. So yeah, I mean, that's what I do for a living. I take things apart and try and put them back together. Do
you enjoy your work?
I like helping people. I mean, if I could go back 20, 30 years, would I still practice law? I don't know, but I've kind of found my way to the entrepreneurial world, the small business world as a lawyer. And I like working on deals and helping people, advise them on, their business structure and creating their business plan. And some of it's marketing, but a lot of it's from a legal standpoint. And yeah, I mean, I enjoy that, but if I move to a beach in Key West, would I do that? Yeah, I'd probably do that too. I think there's a lot of ways to help people. So it doesn't have to be a lawyer. I do think that law is a good education for people. If you don't want to go get your MBA, for example, and you're coming out of college and you feel you want an advanced degree or more of an education for business, I think going to law school is very good. It's a good exercise in thinking, and you learn how to analyze things better and how to research the law and how to understand the law and how to interact with governments and the taxing authorities and things like that. Having said that, though, Tom, I get a lot of situations where I have a business owner who was an attorney, didn't practice, and he has another partner and he drafted their agreements and they're terrible. So I've had dozens of those. So just because you're a lawyer, if you don't, most of our practicing lawyers, all of us know when we should and should not be handling something. So don't do your own agreements. Get a colleague to take a look, because it's always missing something that we put in agreements, because I've done hundreds of them, thousands of them, Yeah. So that's a roundabout way of answering your question of, yeah, maybe I would practice law, but I'm not sure. It's a lot of ways to get to where I am now.
Well, I think a lot of the things that you mentioned so far, a lot of the scenarios that turn sour, the advice of getting more things in writing is major prevention for that. So yeah, I think that's highly valuable.
I'm actually working on a book. It's called 10 Ways to Get Sued by Anyone and Everyone, because my colleague, who's my co-author, is writing this 10 ways kind of series. It's not about how to get sued, obviously. It's about how to not get sued. And a lot of the trend in the book is about, doing things in writing, having a business plan, a partnership agreement, an employee handbook, rules and procedures of your business to avoid problems like that. So a lot of it is about documenting things. And like you said, we're just not good at that. We would rather do other things. It's no fun to deal with law. It's no fun to deal with accounting. Let's go do the fun stuff. Your stuff. Marketing. That's fun. Business development.
I mean, you highlighted something which I wanted to talk to you about, and that is the actual knowing of the law is not all of the job. Some of it is kind of like the negotiating side of it.
Right.
And, I have my education in that from a program called Suits. So very highly realistic, I'm sure. So what have you got to know on the actual non-legal side of it? So perhaps the bluffing a bit, for lack of a better term, negotiating, and then also what your thoughts are on Suits, if you've watched any.
I've watched every episode of Suits, all 9 seasons. It is so unrealistic relative to the practice of law that it's ridiculous because it's just drama. The way these partners get along and treat each other, the way they make these deals, they close these deals that are, hundreds of millions of dollars in 3 days. The guy goes and he threatens this and that, and it's done. It's not the real world, not even close. Negotiating, yeah, there is some posturing when it comes to negotiating. There's certainly certain techniques. Like when I'm dealing with somebody, I want to know more about what their position is and what their thoughts are. Then I want to share what my position and my thoughts are, right? Because I'm gonna work around what it is that they're trying to accomplish, so everyone feels like they're getting their pound of flesh, so to speak, right? And a good attorney, even litigators, right, never ask a question without knowing what the answer is ahead of time. So if I'm coming into a situation, I want to kind of feel out what's important to the landlord, what's important to the company that has your leases on all your equipment. What do they really want? Are they going to take does the landlord have another tenant, really just wants to move on, and he's willing to, let you out for less money in order to re-rent the space? Or is he going to be to use the expression, but a dick about it? So that's a lot of it. The whole Suits things. I mean, I loved Suits. It was fun to watch the whole series, especially on streaming, because you can just binge watch the whole thing. But it's pretty funny about. And by the way, the guys. What was the attorney's name with the lead character with the perfect memory?
Mike Ross.
Yeah, Mike Ross. Yeah, those people don't exist.
Well, the photographic memory thing.
Yeah, right. He could literally, and they would have these briefs or these complaints, these complex legal things that overnight they would stay up, wouldn't sleep, and they would have it all ready the next morning to go. And I mean, come on, it just doesn't happen. But it was fun. Lewis and all those guys. Who was the guy who was Mike's boss? What was his name?
Harvey.
Harvey, right. Harvey and Jessica, and then all the other characters that came on later on. So it's pretty
favorite
funny.
Character at all?
Do I have a favorite character? Oh yeah, definitely. I liked Harvey. He didn't put up with shit from anybody. He would take on everybody.
Well, that tells me something about your negotiating style anyway.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a Harvey. I'm not that good at negotiating, but I think it's pretty funny because I think if you are a Harvey, right, if you take that approach, that's going to come back to really, really haunt you. People don't roll over, because of whatever move you made. Oh, well, we put a bid in this morning and we bought the company out from under you. Like, that doesn't happen. And, so I think you can get good results from your clients if you have amicable relationships with the professionals that you're dealing with, and you build rapport with people. And I think and that's why using a lawyer is advantageous to the business owner, right? Because you are personally invested in this. You're probably emotional about it. Maybe you're losing your business, or you feel you're being taken advantage of. I don't have those feelings, right? So I can talk to the business owner, talk to their attorney, and kind of, make them feel a little bit better about everything, calm the situation down, kind of dissipate the tension in the room, so to speak, and we can get the job done and keep your client focused on, my client focused on, hey, this is better for you to get this resolved and to move on. Now you're working with me going forward. So we'll have things in writing, we'll have a contract, we'll do things purposefully. And you didn't do it in the past. So let's wrap this up. It's not going to go the way you want it to go. Maybe it will, but I don't want them to have that expectation. And let's see if we can get you out of this as easy as we can, so you can move on with your life and spend time with your family and your kids and building your new location, business, whatever it happens to be, as opposed to, just pouring all of your energy into this problem and basically destroying your whole situation. Nobody wins from that. You go to court, at least in the United States, there are no winners in court. There are judgments that are awarded to people from a judge or a jury, but you're always suffering from the impact, both financially and emotionally and whatever, that it has on you and your family and your business and both sides of the transaction, even if it is resolved. So it's always better to, be the good guy and to, I don't know, wave the white flag's not the right word, but you know what I mean? Have rapport with people and find a way to find common ground, even if you're never going to talk again, and just move on with your life. Like that's, I think, the biggest problem that business owners have when they're dealing with that on their own. They're just so emotionally invested in the fact that they feel like they're being taken advantage of. So what? Let's just figure this out and move on.
Well, yeah, it's a good point, and I think that most people learn. Well, I don't know this. This is advice from someone. I don't know this to be true myself, but if you go through the process of actually going through a lawsuit and the pain of that and the financial, like you say, implications of that, you learn not to do it again. Would you say that's
right? Oh, for sure. Yeah, I don't find a lot of people that are jumping into new lawsuits every time. They're just like, especially if they had to go into a lawsuit the second time, they want to do everything they can to avoid it. And look, sometimes the threat of a lawsuit does force things to settle. And that's why sometimes you agree to go to mediation or arbitration. So you have something out of court with an arbitrator that separates the two of you and puts you in one room, puts me in another room and says, Tom, this is what's going to happen if you don't do this and this, and this is the bad ramifications of it. And these are the good ramifications of coming to an agreement. And that's the purpose of those types of exercises. But yeah, I would definitely agree that, once you've been there, maybe reluctantly, because you're a defendant, for example, you try at all costs to avoid it. But look, now you learn, do things in writing, be professional about it, upfront, communicate with your clients. If the client says, hey, will you do this? You say, sure. You follow it up with an email or an amendment to the contract. I just want to make sure that you understand we are changing our agreement, and you have that in writing now. Preferably signed by both parties, but if you can, at least you have a trail to show your course of dealing. And you learn real quick to get good habits. It's the one people that are like, oh, come on, everything's fine. I've never had a lawsuit problem. Like, for example, I get a lot of people that come with their parents, and the parents have developed a real estate portfolio over the years, 2-family homes, whatever. It's all owned in the parents' names personally. Now they have insurance or whatever. They've never been sued. But we live in a different world than when they were starting to buy their insurance, to buy their properties, when probably they were told not to put in their name then. And you get a lot of that. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't move it and fix it just because it never happened in the past, Just because you survived your car crash doesn't mean that you should have airbags in your car moving forward, I mean, safety is a good thing. Protection is a good thing. And I think that you learn sometimes the hard way, like you said.
Past doesn't equal the future, right?
Never. And hopefully it equals a better future because you did learn.
You mentioned the part of your skill set is the selling of businesses or those types of deals. I did have a really good conversation with someone regarding the actual process there. But part of the legal stuff was missed out because that wasn't his skill set. So have you got any thoughts or anything to add on the legal process of selling a business?
Well, yeah. I mean, I have a bunch of them going on right now usually through business brokers or, stuff like that. And everyone's feels differently about it. So some of the attorneys are like, listen, let's get through the due diligence. Let your client look at the business. If they want to move, let's go forward with a contract. But you need to have a contract in writing because there's too much on the line. There's too much going on. The bank, if you're borrowing money, is going to need a contract. In New Jersey, at least, you generally file what's called a bulk sale notice with the Division of Taxation, which protects the buyer from any taxes that the seller may owe if they show up after the fact, after closing. So there's a lot of that stuff. And the details of the contract is what's going to control everything. It's going to give you your period of due diligence to review anything of business. It's going to give you right to whatever records you're going to get. There's going to be environmental requirements that, depending on the state in which you're in or the country in which you are, that fall on the seller and fall on the buyer. In New Jersey, for example, there's an Industrial Site Recovery Act that falls on a seller, depending on the type of business you have, that's the seller's responsibility. And then there are environmental responsibilities on the buyer that if they don't check them out is going to become their problem after closing. So that sets up the game. And I have some transactions right now. We still haven't signed a contract and it drives me nuts. But that like sets the rules for the game when it comes to doing all these things. And the attorneys start working on whatever comes with it, a non-compete for the seller, so he doesn't go into business to compete with the guy he just sold the business to. You might have an employment agreement where the seller's staying on for a while. Maybe he's holding paper, meaning he's holding some of the sales price as a note where the buyer's paying him out over time. So you gotta document that. And there may be a security agreement that goes with that to give the person, the seller, some security against the assets of the business, or maybe there's real estate involved or whatever. And if you don't pay for that, an attorney got disbarred because he just didn't file anything. And you want to protect those people. That's all the legal stuff that goes on. And I've had people sell small businesses and not get lawyers involved. And then they come to me and go, "Oh, this didn't work." Okay, well, what did you file? They don't even know what I'm talking about. So there's all kinds of different ways to put liens on assets to give yourself some protection, but an attorney has to do that because most people don't know how to do it. I
didn't actually think it was possible to sell a business without an attorney or a solicitor, but I guess you can.
Well, I do know some local businesses that they had asked me the question, and then next thing you know, the business is sold, and I don't think they went somewhere else. So yeah, you don't need to. Now, look, if I'm the seller and the seller has a lawyer, for example, especially in today's environment, the lawyers are very reluctant to deal with a buyer or another party without a lawyer, because there have been case rulings where the lawyer is deemed to be an attorney for both parties because he answered like one question that the buyer had at closing. And then something blew up later on and the attorney's in the middle of it because they're like, "Well, you gave him the advice." He said, "Well, he's not my client. He is now." And they deemed it de facto that he was his lawyer. With that regard, that's why banks are like you want to borrow money commercial from a bank now because of those types of rulings. They're like, "Well, you got to get a lawyer, got to have counsel. You can't do it on your own because our counsel's not going to talk to anybody." So yeah, that gets a little crazy. So you don't have to use a lawyer, but you are exposing yourself to so many problems if you don't. The least of which is the taxes that you may inherit or environmental problems you may inherit from the seller, or things that are hidden. I had somebody who provided a lease once. We're transferring the lease because it's some sort of a retail location. And it was, everything's always pushed to close and they want to get closed. I'm like, "Listen, I got to review this lease for you." No, I'll look at that. You do this. All right. I make sure I follow up with an email saying, "Listen, just want you to make sure that we understand you're reviewing the lease and I'm doing this." Okay, no problem. He doesn't really look at the lease. The seller left out like 3 very important pages that basically said that this is your rent, but in 6 months it goes to this, and in a year ago it was a tiered rental system. So the buyer thought the rent was X. It was like 3 times X in 2 years. And the guy said, "I didn't mean to do that. It was an accident." I don't know. But if I had gone through it and found out the pages 40 through 44 were missing, I would have asked for them. And bingo, we would have figured it out. Now, would we not have closed? Maybe. Would we have adjusted the price? Yeah. Now it's water under the bridge or whatever. But, sometimes everybody's rushed. I hate when people are rushing to close. We got to get closed by next week. Why? Just because the rent's due. We'll pay the rent. We'll prorate it, whatever. But don't, do things like that and make precipitous decisions because it'll come back to bite you. It always does. So,
everything you're saying sounds completely typical. So
yeah.
That's pretty much the default, isn't it? Like, people don't do what they're supposed to do. People don't read the documents they're supposed to read.
No, they think it's, I even tell clients, "Listen, I'm sending you this agreement. I'm assuming that you're reading it. Don't assume that because I'm a lawyer, because I'm your lawyer, that everything's good. I got Mitch. I'm human too. So you have to read it and then tell me, 'Oh, wait, we didn't agree to that.'" And I've had clients actually say to me after the fact, "Well, I just assumed it was good because you reviewed it." Well, that's a bad assumption. I do my work and I do my job and I'll protect you. And I had certain things I look at, but I don't know what's in your head or what, and maybe I missed something. I'm not perfect. So you gotta, participate in the process. And some people don't. I had one time, I think it was a will though. I don't think it was a business situation, where I actually got to their house. This is, I was younger. So I used to travel, go to people. I get to their house and they start opening the package So what I did was I think it was wills. I sent them the wills because we didn't have email in those days. It was a bigger pack. And I sent them wills for them to review ahead of our meeting. Right. So then I go to the meeting thinking everything's fine with the documents ready, all tagged to sign. And they start opening the package that I had sent them like a month before. And I go, what are you doing? Oh, yeah, well, we need to review that. Are you kidding? I don't have I couldn't fix anything there. And it turns out that the town I was in, half the town was in one county and the other half of the town was in another county. And I had the wrong county in the documents. Now, did it mean the wills wouldn't be valid? No, there's no address and it just says the county. So we dealt with it, but they would have picked that up if they just looked at them ahead of time. So I've learned over the years to make sure people understand what their responsibilities are and what my responsibilities are. Just because you have a lawyer doesn't let you off the hook. It just makes it a little bit better because you have another party looking out for you.
It is high stakes what you do, though, isn't it?
It can be. I mean, even a small business purchase is a big thing to the person. If they're paying $3 to $5 million for a business, that may be huge to them. And somebody's doing a bit bigger deal that's a $50 or $100 million deal. There's probably more parties involved and more attorneys involved and all that. I don't tend to do those bigger transactions, but it's a big deal to them. And the funny thing is, I think, is that first they'll come to you and say, well, what do you think legal is going to be? I don't know, $5,000 to $25,000. Well, why such a big range? Because I don't know what we're getting into. And that's what it usually ends up being. It's $3,000 to $4,000 a month probably in work because they're ongoing things, but they don't realize how complex the correct way to do a transaction is. And then things pop up like, the business hasn't filed the tax return. And I had one 35 years ago. So the guy's selling that, he's very old. He's now passed away. He's selling this business and he's on oxygen or whatever. And we do a search, obviously, right? You do a tax search and a search on the corporation. It comes back that the corporation was revoked. So this corporation still owns this real estate and the business that we're selling, it was revoked for failure to pay something. I'm not sure, 35 years ago, right? So, and he's still operating, like he's paying his fees to the state to renew his corporation, but the Division of Taxation and the corporate department, they don't communicate. So I call the guy from the Division of Tax and I explained to him, and he was shocked. He goes, 35 years ago, how's this guy still in business? I said, I don't know how you guys operate. So we had to put together the tax returns for the business because they hadn't filed tax returns in those many years. So we had to basically negotiate. There was a minimum tax, whatever. He ended up paying like $150,000 and probably didn't know that money either, Thomas, because his income probably wasn't they didn't make a lot of money. It wasn't a big business. So I had to negotiate that out and I had to go visit the guy and we had to sit down with the tax and they came and got the money at closing. And those things pop up all the time. And if you don't do the searches, your client, who's the buyer, I was the seller, is going to get screwed because the division wants to get paid. And they're going to take your property to pay it, even though you're the guy who bought the property. Good luck. So people don't realize that kind of stuff. What do we need to do searches for? I'm sure it's fine. There's things pop up all the time in the records that are wrong. Maybe the business doesn't owe $500,000 to the bank. It was paid off, but they never discharged the mortgage. And you got to find the bank. The bank's closed. It was sold 3 times over, and there's ways to search that. Clients don't know that, so don't do it yourself.
Why the accidental entrepreneur?
About the podcast? Yeah, so it's funny. So all the stuff we're talking about kind of is where the whole concept of the accidental entrepreneur came from, because I get these people that some of them fall into practice, or whatever they're doing accidentally, but more so they accidentally fail is what happens, because they say, we're going to do this. And they don't take time to even read something basic or listen to your podcast about marketing and about how they should do the business and whatever. And they just kind of run towards whatever light they see at the end of the tunnel, thinking it's all going to be great. And you and I both know 9 times out of 10, it's not. They struggle. So if they would take some time and learn some things and follow some basic principles, they wouldn't do things by accident. So the podcast came about, and I guess we're talking about it today too, to meet with people that have become successful in business and have had their own failures along the way, to share their ideas and help people, the tagline says, to get a better hold of their business, to hopefully avoid some of those mistakes. They'll make mistakes anyway. You and I both know that. But improve their chances of success. And that's what the podcast is all about. Discussions about the stories that people are sharing about their successes and their struggles and their failures in some cases, and what they would do differently and advice they have for people. But you see, I've done 160 episodes. I've interviewed a lot of people, from authors, social media influencers, inventors, entrepreneurs, startup founders. There's themes. Generally it has to do with learning about business operations and being prepared and putting things in writing and writing down your ideas and things like that. And there's a huge difference between, like, and you know this, right? One person that figured out a business in one industry and they're doing well, and then they sell their business or they change and they don't do so well in the next industry because they're not really an entrepreneur. They're just a business owner in that industry, and they don't have these skills that they can transfer to another industry, as opposed to other people that have bought and sold and grown all kinds of businesses because they have spent the time developing the skills they need to improve their chances of success. So
great answer.
That's where the podcast came from. You can find it on, just like you, Apple, Google, Amazon, I don't know, whatever, 7 or 8 different directories.
Well, part of the episode was going to be about, what improves the chances of success for a typical business owner. I know I haven't given you really much time considering, but what would you?
We've covered a lot of them. I mean, we've kind of touched on them going through, so it's not, it's not an unanswered question. I would say people should start with a business plan, and it could be a lean canvas business plan. It could be, I would say that, if I boil it down, there's probably 4 areas you should focus on, right? You got your product or service, you got your people. Maybe that's just you. Maybe you need other skills. A lot of people don't realize that they don't have the skills they need, and they need other people. There's the marketing side of it. How do you market the product? What does the marketplace look like? All that stuff. And then, like you mentioned, the financial and the legal stuff. Even put the legal stuff aside for now, just the financials. What does it take to produce this product? What are the actual costs of running this business? And the people that I know that are really successful really know their numbers. They know how many more customers they need and clients they need before they add new staff or add a new system or whatever. And they're pretty successful in that regard. So that's the number one advice I would give to people, is to create a business plan or a document or a journal that's a working thing that you can use to run your business. Don't create a business plan and put a binder on it and charts and graphs and put it on your shelf and feel like, oh, I did that part, I'm all done. A real business plan is a working document, which ultimately may develop into other documents. So the people section of your business plan may develop into a personnel, a handbook, an employee handbook. The marketing thing could become a whole strategic planning thing in itself, and financials and, all that type of stuff. So that's where I would start. That's the first thing you should put in writing. And then form your company. Don't be a sole proprietor. That's like the worst thing you could do.
Are you company status now, or are you individual?
No, I'm an LLC, my business. But as a lawyer, and this is probably true for accountants and other professionals, and doctors too, we have professional associations, professional corporations, LLCs, things like that. We're still personally liable for what we do, just the nature of being a professional, and we have professional insurance because of it. So there's limited, I don't get as much protection as the typical business owner would get using an LLC. But yeah, you definitely want to have that wall in between you and the people that you do business with. There's rules you got to follow, so follow them.
Well, I think you've been the advice has been great today, so thank you very much for all that. There are some things that maybe I do need to implement as a result of it. But is there anything that would be valuable to the audience regarding the legal advice, which I should have asked, that springs to mind?
No, I don't think beyond what we said. I am available if anybody wants to have a consult. They go to my website. I'm beinhakerlaw.com, and there's 20-minute consults. I'll be happy to talk to anybody, even if it's from a business advisory capacity, if you recognize that I don't practice wherever you are. And as part and parcel of that, I'd be happy to give them a 4-part template to get started on their business plan. But if they're not sure, where to start and what to do, and I'll be happy to talk to anybody if they want to, take me up on it.
What are your goals for the, what
for
you're
this
doing?
year?
And, yeah.
Well, my goals is I like the virtual nature of the practice, and I'm continuing to do more virtual work. So maybe I can have a little bit more flexibility on, traveling and living arrangements and things like that with my wife. And I'm also kind of taking the personal, podcasting, authoring, speaking stuff and breaking it off. So there will be a mitchellbeinhaker.com website, and then there'll be the law firm, because a lot of that was getting lost in the law firm. And obviously I only practice in New Jersey, so it gets a little complicated. So we're kind of breaking those up and rebranding them through a colleague of mine also, who's a marketing guy here. And he had the same experience after we talked. He's like, oh my God, I can't sleep at night. I got to do certain things I haven't done. Like, he didn't even think about half the things he needs. So I'm doing stuff for him and he's doing stuff for me. So that's probably the biggest thing. And then my book also, I've been working on for a while, and I want to get that out in the either, let's say September, or certainly in the fourth quarter of the year, for people to actually use. It's more of a primer. Like, you don't have to read the whole thing. If you can read whatever paragraph or chapter that you think applies to you. So.
And that's How to Get Sued, was it?
10 ways to get sued by anyone and everyone. Sounds
like a read that lots of people should probably peruse that. So
yeah, well, we wanted to have you needed a catchy title. It's too boring. Nobody's going to read it, but maybe more. It's more a bathroom read than it is a beach read. But
so, Mitch, where's the best place for people to find you?
Certainly the website, beinhakerlaw.com. You can register for my newsletter. You'll get notices of all the podcast episodes, blogs, any other things that we put out, the ebooks. I'm on social media, so LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. The podcast is also on, I think, LinkedIn and Facebook. That's always a good way to find me. LinkedIn especially, because I'm more tuned into that than Facebook. Facebook's more like personal stuff. And yeah, I think that's the best way to get, and follow the podcast. Go and subscribe through whatever device you use.
And you'll be having the new personal site coming out anytime now, yeah?
Probably in the fourth quarter of the year.
Okay.
But it's really, it kind of exists. It's just part of the law firm. So that'll be broken out and then kind of revamped a little bit. So
great. Well, thank you very much for your time today. It's been great.
All right. Thanks, Tom.